the person does follow up like within 24 hours every single time. And I'm like, to be honest, like,
You've spent the time crafting your pitch, editing your trailer, preparing your press kit, and writing a personal note to go along with it all. You did everything they told you to do and still nothing. No coverage, no reply, nothing. You start wondering if journalists even open up these emails, or are they just going into an inbox that will never see the light of day?
we get a million emails, a million pitches, and a lot of the time they can be kind of samey, especially if...
That's my guest this week, Bradley Shankar, game editor over at MobileSyrup, one of Canada's leading tech and gaming publications, where Bradley has covered the game scene for almost a decade. And in his time, he has seen every kind of pitch imaginable. The ones that land, the ones that tug on your heartstrings, and the ones that get deleted before he finishes the first line.
You tell a very personal story and it kind of resonates universally.
Bradley's going to show you exactly what makes a pitch worth his and other journalists' time, why your own story might matter more than your screenshots, and how you can get noticed without a PR firm behind you.
You're not the only one. You're not the only person who's emailing. We all got things to do.
He'll also walk you through when to reach out to journalists during different parts of your development cycle and how to follow up without becoming the person journalists dread hearing from.
Sometimes it can feel like I'm kind of fighting a one-man battle.
You'll also learn what to do after your article goes live, because getting coverage is only half the job. So if you've been sending pitches into the void and wondering why nobody's writing about your game, this one's for you. Welcome to Freaking Cool Indies. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Freaking Cool Indies, and today I have the honor and pleasure to be joined by one of Canada's leading and top voices in the gaming space, the one and only Bradley Shankar. Bradley, thank you so much for jumping on, and I cannot wait to pick your brain about all things journalists when it comes to the gaming and indie scene.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. I love what you're doing with the show. I love the name. It's such a great name.
Thank you.
Freaking Cool Indies.
Thank you.
And obviously anything focused on indies in general is much needed. So love what you're doing.
Okay, Bradley, can we shift over? Because I want to just pick your brain about how you discover and how you actually pick what gets covered. Is it a mixture of inbound pitches versus you going out and kind of finding your own story? Or just give me a breakdown about what that looks like when it comes to actually how you find your stories.
No, absolutely. I would say it's definitely a mix. Obviously I do get a lot of pitches, both over email and then, a lot of people reach out via LinkedIn, or even if I meet them at in-person events, because especially in Toronto, there's a lot of really good developer events and community events that I attend. Like even last week at the time we're recording this was XP Summit in Toronto. So, met a lot of developers there that showcase their games. You just sort of run into people and conversations strike up that way. In terms of like the effort that I put in, a lot of it comes from just sort of research. When there's a lot of showcases that happen, I try to do my best to kind of go through them and sort of highlight the Canadian games when possible in my own features anyways. And then naturally that'll sort of bring about maybe getting more directly connected with the developer. It helps, especially when you watch some of these showcases. At the end of the trailer, you'll see Canada Media Fund or Ontario Creates logos, which is really helpful for me because it just kind of immediately identifies that game as Canadian. And then I'm like, oh, I can, take it from there if I want to do more coverage, that sort of thing. So yeah, I would say it's a bit of a mix of both.
Awesome. And for when you do get something inbound, so when the developers does reach out to you, what's the first thing that you look for in the pitch when it kind of lands in your inbox?
Yeah, I think just kind of a unique angle to it because, we get a million emails, a million pitches, and a lot of the time they can be kind of samey, especially if, Balatro comes out and every game wants to be Balatro, or a new Metroidvania comes out and everything is a Metroidvania. So it is sometimes difficult to kind of stand out among that. I will say I do think that there's some PR firms that are doing a really good job of that, like Pop Agenda, which is actually Canadian as well. They represent a ton of indies, and they do a really good job of just at the top of their emails, they have a little GIF, which is a really effective, like quick, succinct way to sort of, in just a few seconds, like show what the game is about. And then if that piques my interest, I can keep scrolling, and they have a lot of relevant links and everything. And they're really helpful as well because they'll include estimated play times. So like if they're pitching a game to review or whatever, knowing 5-10 hours it's going to take is really helpful on the editorial side, because a lot of the time publishers and developers are a little wary of talking about how long a game is. And I get that to some degree, but on the media side, it's a bit frustrating because if I'm going to dedicate time to reviewing a game, it would be helpful to know roughly how long it'll take, right? So having that sort of transparency up front, Pop Agenda does that really well, or even like Evolve PR, which is another Canadian PR firm. They do a really fun job of sort of personalizing things. Like it doesn't just feel like a sort of basic press release. Like they'll inject their own little personality and wit into it, which I think helps a lot to make it stand out. Because with all these emails, I'm more likely to keep reading if you had something a little funny in there or something a little more charming. That sort of thing really helps stand out, I think.
Amazing. For the Evolve one, is the personalization to you or to the, let's say maybe their brand of like making it different from other PR agencies?
Yeah, sometimes it's a bit of both. I think recently it was definitely personalized towards me because they do a really good job of knowing, when games are Canadian and who might be best to reach out for that. Like in the past couple of weeks, I did a feature on a new studio in Edmonton, Studio Reset, which was three former BioWare veterans, and they reached out to me personally to pitch that. Evolve because they know I can cover a lot of Canadian games, or they pitched me a big feature I did on Red Barrels in Montreal, which makes Outlast. They just turned 15. They had their 15th anniversary, so I did a big feature on them for that as well. So they did a really good job of one of those. One of their PR reached out to me via LinkedIn directly, and the other one was just an email pitch. But in both cases, they sort of knew who they were pitching and made it more personalized, and that's a good way to get it to stand out. Because obviously they have a lot of different games they're representing, so doing that sort of thing really helps make those games stand out and make it more likely for me to cover it.
Awesome. And I'm guessing then it's safe to say that when you're looking at a pitch that you're receiving, the developer's own story does play a factor into if you're going to kind of, let's say, move it forward or maybe like a, hey, thanks, but like not right now, right? Like I'm talking, the background of the studio, who's making the game, kind of like why are they making the game as opposed to just like, yeah, here's our new Metroidvania from Edmonton.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that personal story adds a lot. I mean, you see something like Cuphead, which is probably one of the early examples of popular Canadian indie games. Like the big story with that was like it was two brothers from Saskatchewan who, kind of remortgaged their homes and went all in on making this game. Or even something like Balatro, like we don't actually know who that guy is, but just the sort of story of, it's one dude from Saskatchewan making this popular game, like that kind of adds to it. And I think obviously in even more personal cases, like Venba was a game also from Toronto that really blew
Yeah.
up in recent years. And I think I was actually one of the first to do a feature on that game. I remember reading about it on PC Gamer and then wanting to do more once I found out he was Canadian. And, that story of, being inspired by his family's immigrant journey and wanting to kind of profile his parents, what they went through and give them a little more recognition for that. I think that added a lot to the game and that story. So, yeah, definitely the personal stories I think add a lot. Whether you do have that sort of more emotional connection or even just the sort of impressive, oh wow, this is one guy who made Balatro sort of thing. I think all that stuff adds a lot to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Venba, a phenomenal game. I played it a few years back on Game Pass, and again, it's like quick 2 hours. I think 2 or 3 hours at most. And like, but I've just played on a Friday night, and like, credits rolled, and just like tears in the eye, and you're like, that was sick. Like, great
It's a
again,
beautiful
great
game.
worth of 2 hours of my time. And so that's very, very helpful, Bradley. And when it comes to, let's say, positioning the story, then is that the job of the game dev, or let's say the pitch that's coming into you, or should that be left up to you? And again, their job is to more so just be like telling their story to get you interested, right? Like what makes something newsworthy, I guess, in your mind?
Yeah, I think it could be a mixture of both there. For me, yeah, I just try to look for something that is doing something more unique in the space because obviously there are so many different games, and I obviously it'd be amazing to be able to cover as many of them as possible, but can't obviously do that. So yeah, I do try to look for something that is a bit more unique. Like in recent months, I would say, especially in terms of highlighting what I'm covering, I've been looking a lot more, especially with the geopolitical climate that we're in right now. Kind of trying to focus on things that are even more sort of hyper specific Canadian, for lack of a better term. Like I just did a big feature a couple weeks ago about nearly 20 games that are set in Canada, and then I did a lot of like individual features on each of those games as well to kind of give them two different pieces of coverage. And I think that's kind of a good way of, if we're talking about something that's unique, like what's more unique than a game that's set in Canada? Because there's not a lot that do that. So I think that's definitely something to look for. And also, again, yeah, just the stories of the developers, I think, add to it too. And I think that makes the games more unique. in a lot of ways too. Like one of my favorite games from the last several years, which is also Canadian, is Thousand Times Resist, and that was a core team of 4 people from Vancouver who were former performance artists. And during COVID, because their industry just completely shut down, they decided, oh hey, let's make games. And Thousand Times Resist is, I think, one of the best written games ever made. And I think a big reason for that is because they come from a different art form entirely, and it gives them a unique perspective. They're not writing this sort of AAA way of video games. There's a poeticism to the way they write, and I think again that story, the fact that they were very upfront about, oh hey, we're former performance artists, and then obviously they inject the very personal immigrant story where it's about a Hong Kong family in Vancouver, and then drawing from Vancouver itself. So all those different elements of their personal backstory informs the game and the narrative surrounding it, and that really helps.
That's awesome. And for our listeners who are listening who are maybe outside of Canada, a lot, obviously, like a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is our amazing country. But would you say a lot of this still holds true no matter where they're kind of working and writing from? Like, again, a lot of the advice, or at least maybe reaching out to just your local country or community or town or whatever you want, your state, whatever it is, right? Like reaching out to just local journalists.
Yeah, I think so. I think that definitely helps. And I think just that idea of kind of telling your own personal story, I think kind of resonates regardless of whether you're selling it to a Canadian audience or, an American audience or whatever. I mean, I think in the case of a lot of those games that I featured, like Thousand Times Resist, like Venba, those are quintessentially Canadian stories, but they were so popular around the world. And, it's kind of that old expression. I'm sort of paraphrasing the idea, you tell a very personal story and it kind of resonates universally. And so I think that's those are some great examples of, yeah, as long as you sort of focus on what makes your game unique, that personal identity, even if it is more Canadian or British or Asian or whatever, if you kind of hone in on that identity, I think it will make it appeal to kind of everyone. I mean, even outside of games, one of the biggest examples I like to keep bringing up to people recently is Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie, which was made here in Toronto. Like that movie has been playing so well around the world, and that is like maybe the most Toronto movie ever made. Like, but it's so well done because if you've never seen the show, if you've never been to Toronto, it's still just a really good movie. Obviously, if you've seen the show and or are from Toronto or Canada, you'll get more out of it. But that was selling out places around the world, like theaters in Australia, which couldn't be farther from Canada, that was selling out there, and obviously something like Heated Rivalry as well. So I think we're seeing kind of holistically, like not just in games, telling these more personal stories and not losing sight of that identity, watering it down for international audiences, I think makes it all the more impactful.
Yeah, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Again, Canada's been on a pretty big tear, not even just recently, just in general, right? Like, I know, obviously, with everything going on in the world, we're not going to get into any of that, but I still do think Canada holds a pretty good spot in what the world views as us as a country, regardless of, every country has its own things happening in and inside and out. But, I think when people see that, okay, this is from Toronto or this is Vancouver, like people are still excited to kind of tune in. And then those stories that you're telling, like you exactly said, they resonate globally, which is always exciting.
No, absolutely.
Amazing. So, and Bradley, this is next question I have is once you have gotten a pitch and you've locked in on the story, you're excited about it. What's your next step? Are you reaching back out to the developer, or are you just kind of like, all right, let me do my own research, let me jump in, maybe play the demo, and like I'm just going to kind of take it from here?
Yeah, sometimes I'll definitely follow back up. Sometimes because I'll be fully transparent because we're such a small team. Like we're only 3 people now. We used to be 7, so we were 4 last year. So that it has been sort of an adjustment period of, you know, acknowledging that I can't do as much as I used to. So I have to kind of be a little more choosy in that sense. So a lot of the time I'll just be upfront and honest with the developer. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to pass on this because I just don't have the bandwidth, or it's just not really relevant to what I'm doing. Or in other cases, I'll be like, I love what you're doing with this game. Now's not really the best time, but can we maybe circle back in a few months, sort of thing? And I think generally, especially on the indie side, where they're a lot more flexible in terms of their marketing and everything, I think they're generally quite happy to kind of circle back in the future. So that's really helpful as well, I think.
Amazing, amazing. Now, for the next part of the podcast and for this conversation, Bradley, I want to jump into a little bit more tactical stuff. And I know you've already spoken about, what makes a good pitch, but I really want to spend a little bit of time just to break down once again, kind of like what is a good pitch versus what is a bad one when it comes to reaching out to a journalist. Again, I know you've already talked about a few things that some companies have done right. The GIF at the top providing you play times, like obviously just making your life as a journalist easier. So what are some other elements that make a really good pitch besides, again, the story, the GIF, and the playtimes, if we will?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of the variety of pitches, like not just sending emails, but kind of doing outreach in other ways, like whether it's being at these sorts of events, whether it's sometimes even social media. Like I'll see a developer or a marketer or whoever sort of promote that. Like even earlier today, I saw someone which I hadn't really been that aware of. I saw someone who actually I think is working with the Venba team had actually shared, oh, there's this India game showcase happening in a couple weeks, and just kind of promoting it that way. And that's kind of a great way to do outreach as well. Like maybe that would have gotten buried in my inbox, but seeing it on social media, seeing a mutual retweet it, that sort of thing is a good way to get that kind of sort of exposure as well. And I think even just having really, and I think you might ask this later on, but with the press kits, I think having a good variety of those in terms of what they include is really helpful as well. Like as an example, I'll shout out recently. Again, I don't want to keep making everything about Canadian games, but obviously that's what I do the most.
Do it up, do it up.
There was a game that came out a couple weeks ago called The Caribou Trail from a studio called Unreliable Narrators in Montreal. And just a quick overview, that's a game about Newfoundland soldiers in World War II. So going off to the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey as it's now known, to fight, and they were very inexperienced. So it's a very wonderful game, and I loved it. And part of what was helpful with that game is their press kit not only had the usual, like here's your images and whatever, like it had press releases. It had links to all of the relevant storefronts and social media pages. It had an in-depth FAQ on, everything about the game and even the content that's within it. Because obviously it's a war game. It's pretty heavy subject matter. So it was very thorough about content warnings and everything. And I think all of that is really helpful because it just kind of gives everything that I would need to cover your game. And I did end up covering it several times, actually. That is a really sort of good way to one-stop shop to kind of give me everything I need to cover your game, or at least have more information about it if I choose to cover it. So I think having that as well really helps. Because yeah, sometimes, and I get it, obviously indie developers don't have a lot of resources, so I'm not faulting anyone who doesn't necessarily have a very thorough press kit, but I think sometimes, you do see them where it's maybe just a few images and that's pretty much it. So having more stuff in there, if you're able to do it, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, that's amazing. A lot to unpack there. So number one, what I heard from you first is that the channel of reaching out doesn't always matter, right? It doesn't need to just be an email. Again, kind of get in front of the eyes, maybe any way that you can with while being respectful. But again, a DM, an email, kind of tagging. Well, what are your thoughts about tagging someone who you want to be covering your game?
Yeah, I mean, if it's relevant, for sure. Like, obviously, if someone like tweeted at me, or I'm not on Twitter, but on Blue Sky, if someone like tagged me, oh hey, here's this Canadian game, and bringing my attention to it, like that's worthwhile. But sometimes if it's something that's not even, like, sometimes I've had people on LinkedIn like tag me in something, and I'm like, this isn't really relevant at all. Like, I don't really know why I'm tagged in this. So it is nice. But yeah, no, definitely, I'm not opposed to that at all. And yeah, I do think having those different forms of outreach are helpful because again, emails can just kind of be a mess, and a lot things can get lost in there a lot. So I think sometimes it is better to sort of message me directly because that's one of the great things about the sort of digital age that we're in. Like besides email, you can obviously do social media, you can do Discord. LinkedIn, I've grown a lot on LinkedIn in the last year or so. I've reached out, I've connected with a lot of developers there, and I think that's a really helpful way. I mean, obviously, there's a lot you can criticize LinkedIn for, but I do think it is a good sort of direct way to cut through a lot of the noise on social media and just kind of get to someone directly. So I think there's a lot of different ways like that you can reach people, or even in recent months as well. Like a lot of these local events. Like I think Meet to Match is a wonderful platform for people who don't know. When you go to an event like Montreal International Game Summit or XP Summit, you can like opt in for this program, and you create a little profile, and then people can just kind of request meetings with you. And it's a really great way to connect with people. Like I met a bunch of people at XP last week that I hadn't known about before, and they're doing really cool things. And a great variety of people. Like one of the people I connected with was from the University of Toronto, Mississauga, because they have one of the largest sort of game preservation collections in Canada. I think actually the largest. And so they wanted to kind of talk more about that. And that's cool because that's not something that would necessarily maybe come across my radar otherwise, right? But that's still a very great initiative that they're doing there. And, using something, going to an event and using Meet to Match was a great way to kind of connect with me on that. So,
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I also had a bunch of great calls last week, or great chats, I should say, last week. And Meet to Match was so easy to use, and just a great way of going through the list and being like, oh, these are people, I followed them before. I've always wanted to kind of, just get in front of them, ask them questions, do whatever it was. But really, really great way. And again, especially for those who are trying to meet publishers or meet journalists, really good to be looking at what's going on locally or just at conferences in your area and see if you can kind of meet people in person. Because at the end of the day, an in-flesh handshake is always going to be a great way of having someone remember you. And then, following up and doing all that stuff after from a networking standpoint is great.
100%.
Amazing. So, and then the next part that I wanted to dive back into, and like you said, the press kit, right? So the press kit, obviously, I think that's something that we can go really deep into. I don't think we need to go too deep into it on this episode, right? We want to make sure that, like you're saying, you have some images, some videos, the key capsule art so that you can use it within your stories. Of course, things about the team, etc. Obviously, if a team wants to go above and beyond, that is awesome. But what I wanted to maybe spend a little bit more time on with you is the structure of the email that you typically find to be the best when someone is reaching back out to you, right? I'm guessing for the most part, again, let's just say we have GIF at the top, we have estimated game time, a quick bio about the team, and then is it just like, hey, here's a link to our full press kit if you want to learn more? Or what would have you seen to just be a really good flow as opposed to just like dumping 17 paragraphs into the body of an email and saying like, all right, thanks, Bradley. Like, please cover my game.
No, absolutely. I think that is a good structure. I think maybe keeping it as succinct as possible, and then maybe having links to like a press kit or website or whatever, if more information is necessary, I think is really helpful. And even just little things like, having little emojis in there or a little color coding for certain sections of the email, I think helps it sort of flow and read better. Yeah. And also like for my line of work, and this is common if there's a press release in there, but having the city there is really helpful. And again, in a press release, that tends to be at the top, but because that tells me right away, like if I see like, just pulling it as an example, if I see like Switzerland there, like Zurich, Switzerland, I'm like, okay, I might not read it right away because it's not a Canadian game sort of thing. And to that point, actually, in terms of like discovery, just kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier, that is something that I really do appreciate when companies on their social media pages have their city in there, which is really helpful because then I know right away it's like, oh, you're Canadian. So that's always very helpful. But yeah, sort of going back to like the sort of flow of the email. Yeah, just having that sort of pertinent information, what type of game it is, having that GIF at the top is really helpful, or even just a trailer at the top. But I think the GIF is helpful because, again, it's sort of a nice, quick way to show the game without having to go on YouTube and watch a 2-minute trailer sort of thing. And yeah, I think just maybe keeping it as tight as possible without kind of, because sometimes you keep scrolling and the email keeps going and it's like, okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bradley, do you have any, I don't know if preference is the right word, but let's go with this. So developers often will go and just kind of send a mass email out, right? They have a list of 100 journalists that they want to kind of get it out to, and it's just going to go and the only thing that changes is, hey, Bradley, hey, Mike, hey, Samantha, hey, Nicole, right? Does that bother you or change anything in your opinion, or do you prefer to have it be a little bit more like, hey, I know that this was written with me in mind, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think both are good. I mean, I totally understand, the mass email. You've got a lot of people to reach out to. So I don't obviously like take offense or anything if it's not personalized. I will say it, and the email doesn't even necessarily need to be personalized to me, but I think something that isn't always helpful in my case is because, PR people work on different hours and they have different clients. And I get it. I get that that's the nature of the job, but sometimes the email will come through like really late. And it's like, well, unfortunately, like I'm off hours, so I'm not responding to that, or I'm not even reading it. Or if I do read it, obviously, because it's off hours, I'm like, I open my email quickly. I'm like, out for dinner or I'm playing a game or whatever. And then I just forget about it because I'm not working, and then it just gets buried under the next day's emails. So, uh, that's kind of the unfortunate nature of it. And again, like I'm sympathetic to, they have different schedules, and especially with the video game industry, there's a lot of them in LA, so they'll be emailing at 7
Mm,
p.m. Toronto time, and it's 4 p.m. their time. That's a common situation where a lot of emails will come through at 7 p.m., and it's like, I'm done for the day, man.
yeah.
So, and again, I get it. They're on a different time zone, but yeah, that is the sort of thing that does make it a little harder to keep up with some of these emails. I mean, not even necessarily the mass email so much, but just the timing of it. Because if it comes through in the evening or on a weekend, even, it's a little harder to kind of get visibility on it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe this actually goes right into the next thing I want to talk about, which is the importance of following up. So a developer sends you an email at, 4 o'clock their time, 7 p.m. our time on a Friday. So of course they're not going to hear anything back for maybe a few days. But how long do you think they should be waiting to follow up, and or like what should that follow up at least kind of entail when it comes to trying to bring that email back up to the top of your inbox?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple days is reasonable, a few business days, because yeah, sometimes I'll have people that like within 24 hours they're already following up, and I feel like that's a little much, and kind of a pet peeve. But sometimes when the emails just like just making sure you saw this, I'm like that kind of sounds a little passive aggressive to me. Like I do think like a little kindness goes a long way, right? Like even if it's just, oh hey, just a heads up, I emailed you, just wanted to follow up on this sort of thing. Like I don't know, I think that the way you say it kind of makes a difference as well. And yeah, so I think, yeah, giving it a couple days. And also just, sometimes if they're not directly asking for something, like if they're just sending about an email, sending an email about a game, like an announcement or whatever, sometimes I think that they expect that they're just going to get a response. And I'm like, unless it's like a specific question, if I was interested to learn more, I might have maybe followed up with you. So yeah, sometimes I think like within reason, sometimes a follow up isn't necessary. Like, so yeah, obviously it depends, I think.
Yeah. And for that one, that like the announcement one, that's just more of like getting it onto your radar as opposed to
Yeah.
having an actual call to action of like, hey, this game's coming out in 3 weeks. Like, would you be able to review it, or would you be interested in doing an article on it?
Hmm. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Any horror stories about people who just followed up way too often, or do you kind of nip that in the butt like, pretty quickly and just say, hey, thanks, but no thanks type of deal?
Yeah, I mean, there is one brand, obviously, I won't name names, that
Of
does,
course,
like,
of course.
the person does follow up, like, within 24 hours every single time, and I'm like, to be honest, like, that kind of rubs me the wrong way, like, you're not the only one. You're not the only person who's emailing. We all got things to do, so, like, yeah, I just feel like that's a little disrespectful of people's time and, not really acknowledging of that sort of thing. But, yeah, I think in general, people are pretty good about that sort of thing. I think the horror stories, if anything, are more just, and again, I'm sympathetic to PRs, the middlemen usually, so it's not necessarily their fault, but the horror stories more are just not having enough lead time for things. Like a lot of the time, like even we saw this a few days ago with 007 First Light. The codes came in on a Friday, and then the embargo was Tuesday, review
Yeah.
embargo. So it's like, and this was the U.S. long weekend too. So I feel especially bad for the journalists who in the U.S. who were off for 3 days, and then they were expected to play a 20-hour game and review it within like 3 or 4 days. Like, I think that's not ideal in a lot of cases, and obviously that's like a more extreme case. But even just in general, like a lot of the times you get an email about something that's embargoed for like the next day, and I'm like, that's just not enough time, unfortunately.
Yeah. So when should a developer think about reaching out to a journalist? And maybe this is more so like throughout the production of their game, right? Like kind of when's too early and maybe when's too late.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the great things about indie development is they have a lot more flexibility in that sense. Like they're not a big $200 million AAA game that has a very strict like marketing cycle. So I think it's really kind of up to the developer and when I talk to them, I try to be flexible around that too. Like when I was meeting with developers at XP Game Summit last week, some of their games were like really early in development, and so I was kind of asking them like, what makes more sense for you, like to do an article now early on to kind of engender early support, or does it make more sense late once the game is more fully formed? And some of them have different sort of perspectives on that. Obviously, if some of them have like Kickstarters or whatever earlier on, I think makes more sense, obviously, because they want the money for that. Sometimes in some cases, a game being in development for a long time, I can like interview them earlier on, and then maybe years later we do a follow up and just kind of talk about how the game has sort of evolved in that time. Like we did something about like that recently with Roller Girl, a game that's being made in Toronto. Like we interviewed the developer Indigo 3 years ago, and then for this big feature I was doing about Canadian game set in Canada, because her game is set in small town Ontario. I followed up with her and we did like a separate piece and kind of talking about how the game had evolved over the past 3 years. I thought was pretty interesting. But yeah, definitely, I think it also helps a lot in these busier times that we're in. Like right now is just Summer Game Fest time, basically. Like that's next week. So I think giving as much lead time as possible if you're part of those showcases, because there's literally like 20 different showcases during that week. And there's
Yeah.
so many games in all of them that like it's just impossible to keep up with everything. So when possible, reaching out, and I've had a few already, giving it even a couple weeks lead time, or at least putting on our radar, oh, we're going to have an embargoed release for you for timed with this showcase. That really helps a lot. Even if you don't have all the information, by the way, just putting that on my radar is really helpful. Because yeah, a lot of the time something cool will be announced and then I'm like, oh, I'd actually cover that. But then they literally gave like 1 day's notice. And it's like, I just, especially as a small team. And obviously we're not unique to that. Games media in general, obviously, is facing a lot of cutbacks. So I imagine a lot of other teams are facing the same challenges. So having as much runtime as possible really helps.
And Bradley, you've spoken to it a couple times already, so I just want to kind of clarify and double tap on the PR side of things. Now, I know obviously in a perfect world, people can have a PR agency helping them out. They're the ones managing the beats, managing getting the information out to journalists. For your experience, I guess, do you work exclusively, or will you kind of take exclusively from a PR, or does an indie dev, can they just kind of send it out themselves without having to have something that's a little bit more formal to kind of get it across your desk?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I think one thing I'll say is PR people have gotten a lot better overall in terms of identifying, that, oh, hey, MobileSyrup covers Canadian games more so than pretty much anybody. So they like to kind of make direct pitches that way. Like even without mentioning the exact game, like one of the developers that was at XP Summit last week, like I had their PR who's in the US reach out and say, oh, hey, these devs are going to be at XP Summit. Do you want to talk to them while they're there? And confidentially, they're going to have an announcement during the Summer Game Fest show timing. And that was great because that was a couple weeks ahead of Summer Game Fest. So it gives me more than enough time to sort of, put this together. And that was a kind of a good example of them sort of thinking outside the box. And like, most US PR probably wouldn't even give a second thought about a Toronto gaming conference, right? But this PR person was very smart and sort of acknowledging that. And, hey, let me reach out to Brad and pitch it. And then they were pretty flexible on when it goes up too. But I was talking with them and we're like, oh, yeah, it probably makes most sense to time the interview with their announcement. So I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Brad. And again, looking into what is actually happening outside, where people are, who's covering what in different local areas is just, again, let's underline that, double click that for anyone who is listening to this podcast to get your game out in front of the right people. Now, I wanted to ask you, what is best practice about what happens after one of your articles runs? So if you were covering one of my games and I, as the game developer, see it goes live, like what do you want to see? And again, is that like amplifying the coverage, sharing it, tagging you, tagging MobileSyrup, or is it kind of, again, the expectation is just like, hey, I like what you're building. I'm going to write a piece about it. This helps me obviously as MobileSyrup and as an outlet. Or yeah, I just kind of like, what do you expect from the developer after you've?
Yeah, I don't necessarily expect anything, but I mean, it's really great when they do share it because I've talked about this a lot. I think the Canadian games media space, besides being very small, we're not that well unified. Unfortunately, like a lot of the time, I'll be doing these what I think are really cool features, and people who say they care about uplifting Canadian games don't do so much as even retweet it. Which is like to me, it's like you're not really being you're being disingenuous here, right? Like if you really cared about uplifting Canadian games, we would be, sharing each other's work all the time, collaborating more. But there's a lot of sort of in circles in that sense. So when it really helps a lot when a developer shares it, like even the PR, like as an example, when I wrote about that new studio from the former BioWare veteran, Studio Reset, someone from Evolve had retweeted it, the PR firm representing the game, And then because they've worked with him, one of the original Dragon Age developers who follows her retweeted it, and then the article sort of blew up. It got a second life because of that, right? And that's just a great example of sort of the natural organic growth that can happen on these stories just by resharing it, right? Like that took literally 5 seconds on their part to click on the story and then hit retweet, and that helps a lot, to bring awareness to this sort of stuff. So I think, yeah, that really does help a lot. Or even just, sometimes if they include us in the marketing, like the trailers, if they mention our name or whatever, that's always really cool when they do that. And obviously not essential, but that sort of thing is really helpful, I think.
Yeah,
Just sort of
awesome.
helping us help us help you promote the game, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Brad. So we have covered a lot of ground in this episode. So I want to make sure I give you some time and just, is there anything else that we missed that we haven't talked about? Just anything that's important for you as a journalist, for an indie dev to know when it comes to reaching out to you or just reaching out to journalists in general to get their game, again, more featured or seen or just in front of more eyeballs.
Yeah, I think in general, just the sort of big takeaway that I have is I think it's great when devs, and obviously PR that work with them, think more local and personal. It's sort of what we were talking about again earlier, where, focusing on that more personal touch, whether that is in terms of the stories that they're telling or the way that they outreach with these games. I think it adds a lot to sort of, so many things are competing for your attention. So having that sort of more authored approach to it, I think really helps sort of cut through the noise, whether that is a direct message or just a more tailored pitch. Because I think that goes a long way. For me, it's really heartening when I hear a dev or a PR person like specifically thought of me to pitch this game, and it feels more personal in that way. And it's like that. Not only does that help better get the game across to me, but it sort of reinforces to me, it's like, okay, so what I'm doing actually is having some sort of difference. Because often being again, probably like the only person who really does stuff on this level about Canadian games, sometimes it can feel like I'm kind of fighting a one-man battle. So when I go
Yeah.
to these events and I meet with the devs, and they share these thoughts and these words of encouragement, it does mean a lot. And I think applying that to the way they reach out in terms of promoting the games, announcing the games, that sort of thing, I think makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing, my friend. Well, Brad, the way I end every single episode of Freaking Cool Indies is a segment that I call Play It Forward, and it is my ability to continue to shout from the rooftop all of these amazing teams and studios and games and projects that are out there. So I will pass the baton over to you and ask you to give a shout out to, again, a game, a project, or a studio that you have just been loving and you want to get more eyes on it.
Yeah, I want to shout out an indie studio in Toronto called Hilltop Studios.
Amazing.
They made a game. Their first game was in 2024 called Lil Guardsman, which was a really sort of colorful, charming riff on Papers, Please, which was a much more like, serious narrative game about empathy with an immigration officer. But their take on it was more fantastical and colorful, very inspired by like Saturday morning cartoons. It was really funny and well acted. And they have a new game coming out this year called Curse of Rest Haven, which is the complete opposite in terms of tone and style. It's a gothic roguelike time loop game. But I just think they're a really cool studio because they're making these very personal, sort of unique, colorful or in this case, gothic, very stylized sorts of games. And I think it really speaks to not only the talent that we have in Toronto here, but in specifically the idea of having different kinds of artists approach games. Like the head of the studio who does writing, directing, composing, a multi hyphenate, Scott Christian. Him and several of the other devs have big backgrounds in the art scenes, whether it's theater or music or animation. And I think that really shows in sort of the creativity of the games that they make, and the musicality of it. And like even Lil Guardsman, like there's some of the people that you sort of talk with are nods to like slasher movies. Like there's one character named Stabatha, which is just a nod to like, Jason Voorhees sort of character. Or there's a psychotic Disney princess style character who like sings about wanting to burn the kingdom down. And they're all like really well acted and well written, and the music behind them is all really good. And I think that's a testament to them coming from a different background than just, oh, I'm a programmer sort of thing. And also just the fact that they do a lot of cool stuff locally in Toronto. Like Scott works with ACTRA, which is our Canadian Actors Union, and really helped them sort of get a better deal for actors in video games. And they do a lot of events and everything. So I think all around, just a really good, really talented studio. And definitely check out Little Guardsman and Wishlist Curse of Resthaven.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Again, shout out to both Scott and Matt and the whole Hilltop team. I actually recorded an episode with both of them as well, and it
Amazing.
will either it'll either already be posted, so go ahead, check it out. If it is, I'll throw the little link here. Otherwise, it's going to be coming shortly after your episode, Bradley. But it was exactly all about that, right? Like game one is a very not cartoon. Well, it is cartoonish, but like not kiddish. But again, very different style as opposed to game two. And I really wanted to dig into that of like, what does it mean to be a Hilltop game? How to change genres while keeping your audience. So a really, really cool episode. A great conversation. Again, going back to people who are just promoters, true promoters of the Canadian game scene. Scott is like close to the top of that list. He is someone who is just such an advocate for everything happening in the city and in this country. And, I think we're all better for it. So definitely check it out.
100%.
Check out Little Guardsman. All the links will be in below. Again, Curse of Resthaven, I've actually had a chance to also play and check out as well. And really, really cool stuff that they're building there. And even just seeing the life cycle of them building it has been really cool. So yeah, shout out Hilltop Studios. Great pick, Brad. And besides that, my friend, where can the people find you if they want to learn more, if they want to connect, if they want to send you a million email follow-ups? What's the best way to find you, buddy?
Yeah, I'm not on Twitter anymore. I deleted that recently, but I'm on Blue Sky at Brad Shankar, .bsky.social. I'm on Instagram, same thing, Brad Shankar, and then obviously MobileSyrup.com. I'm still on there actively and publishing things daily. And yeah, those are probably the best ways to follow me.
Amazing, amazing. I know, and look, you can tell me to edit this part out here, but I've also found your letterbox, buddy. And first off, you got some banger ass reviews. I also saw Sheep Detective, and I agree with your rating. I actually gave it 5 out of 5. I love Sheep
Okay.
Detective. I thought it was
It was
so
great.
good. But as a former Blockbuster employee, movies will forever be my love, and we also actually share another common bond of former Future Shop employees. So
No way.
again, when I saw that you had your letterbox, I don't know, I think it was on one of your your link in bio kind of things there, and I was just like yesterday when I was prepping for the episode, I just found myself like reading a whole bunch of your movie reviews. I was like, these are so good. Who knew?
Thank you.
Who
Yeah.
knew? Who knew a journalist who writes for a living could have a phenomenal letterbox as well? So
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, again, because we're just so small, short staff. Like, I would love to do more movie stuff, and I get to dabble in it occasionally. Like, I do a streaming column every week, and I did TIFF last year for the first time.
wicked.
So I'm trying to do a little bit more on that. And actually, even yeah, I'll have a couple more things coming up in the near future related to sort of movies and television. But yeah, no, I love it. Movies are my second great love after games, and anytime I can kind of bring the two together, like with the new Bond game, I'm gonna be doing a review of that soon because I marathoned all 25 Bond movies in like a month and a half. So yeah, I love getting to do that.
I love it. I love it. And thankfully for us, the reviews of the new Bond game are coming in and it's supposed to be wicked. So I'm also very excited to check it out myself. But again, Brad, thank you so much for taking time, my friend. Again, go follow Brad, check out MobileSyrup, connect with him. And again, if you are out there, regardless if you're in Canada or not, use your local journalism, help to get them stories because your game will get in front of so many more eyes than you can ever think. So again, Brad, thank you for doing all that you do for the Canadian game industry, my friend. And to all of our listeners out there, keep creating, keep being awesome, and we will see you in the next one.
Thank you.